it is always a pleasure to welcome my next guest back to Property Tribes. It's Bill Irvine, who I believe to be the most authoritative person on the topic of universal credit and LHA in the UK. Bill, it's so lovely to see you again. And we like to have these regular catch-ups because you're dealing with landlord and tenant issues every day of the week. And one of the things that you have to deal with is the DWP and how it's just like this impenetrable wall, and the frustration that you experience. It's almost like you're in a loop where you just end up back at the beginning when you're trying to get something done. You must have the patience of a saint, Bill.
I wish that was the case. My wife would probably take a different view of that. But you're right about hitting the brick wall at DWP. I actually wrote an article about this way back in 2011. Actually, the title of it was Hitting the DWP Brick Wall. And I explained in that how I was fearful that the DWP would be remote and ambivalent, very difficult to communicate with. And I went on at quite some length and basically saying they threw the baby out the bathwater when they decided to move the housing part of the award from the councils to the DWP staff. And my impression over the last number of years is that the DWP staff, when it comes to the housing cost part of it, have just not been trained properly. They're not being supported properly. And as a result, they are regularly making mistakes. The recent report on overpayments for 2020-21 suggested in 1 year there was £6 billion worth of overpayments. DWP recently have been saying that a lot of that was to do with COVID and a lot of that was to do with people making fraudulent claims, but it wasn't. That's misinformation. The truth of the matter was a lot of it was down to errors made in part of the DWP staff. And one of the biggest errors was that they were told to dispense with the usual validation checks, like asking for copies of tenancy agreements, asking for validation of a living in the property, asking for validation from landlords, the person that actually moved on. They were treating the information from tenants as sacrosanct and ignoring information from landlords. They would not accept it from landlords or for that matter, other organisations. I deal with housing associations, some of whom have 70,000 tenancies, and in some cases 60-70% of those are on benefits, including UC. And for a while they were not accepting information even from the housing association sector, who get a better deal than the private sector landlords. I don't see any improvements anytime soon unless they really accept the fact that they really need to start training their staff. Many of the staff that landlords contact and even tenants contact are not actually even employed by DWP. They're actually employed by agencies like Capita, Serco, and one of my landlord clients was saying to me last week, he asked one of them to give them his name, and he refused. And he said, "Well, you're a public servant." He said, "No, I'm not. I'm an employee of Serco. I don't need to give you my name."
That's terrible, Bill. The whole thing, it calls to mind, bounce back loans, how they were handed out like candy. At the end of the day, this is taxpayers' money, and it's absolutely scandalous what you've just revealed about what's going on. And, at the end of the day, it really negatively impacts on both landlords and tenants. And even if it's the tenant that is, misappropriating the housing element of the UC or the LHA, it will ultimately result in them being evicted anyway. So nobody is a winner in all of this. And I kind of feel that you have a bit of a bromance going on with the DWP Director General, Neil Cooling, because you write to him on a regular basis and you try and hold him to account for all these issues that that you're encountering on a daily basis, and you don't really get much joy back from him, do you?
No, in fact, he's now taken his email address off limits, and you can't write to him now. And that's not just me. Nobody can write to him. I'm old-fashioned enough to remember the days when, you know, public servants, whether they work in the council or whether they work in the civil service, when they sent a letter out, they put their name at the bottom of it and their contact details. You don't get that. Some of the letters that landlords are getting just now about overpayments, they're not actually receiving, first of all, the letter that they're required to receive to explain what caused the overpayment in the first place and why they've been held culpable. But when you look at the actual letters, the invoices they're getting, they give 2 numbers on it, neither of which is actually operational. And you're not allowed to send anything by email. You have to send it by, if you've got any objections to this, you have to write, not phone, but you have to write to an office in Wolverhampton, the mail opening unit. I mean, it's just obstacles put in people's paths. I'm not just talking about landlords, talk about claimants as well. The various hurdles that are put in their path before they can actually make a claim and process their claim. But one of the things I wanted to speak to you about today was something called managed migration, which the DWP started doing in May with a first tranche of about 500 cases. Now, what this managed migration is up until now, there's about over 6 million people claiming this benefit, universal credit, which is now the main means-tested benefit in the UK. But by 2024, the end of that year, there's going to be another 2.6 million people transferring over. And they are currently receiving housing benefit mostly, and benefits like income support or employment support allowance. And they'll be notified sometime in probably next year, 18 months, of their need to claim universal credit. And when they do that, what will happen is they'll stop receiving housing benefit and they'll stop receiving their ESA or whatever, and they'll move over on to universal credit. So universal credit will then have an uptake of about, say, maybe 8.5 million people, and will replace all of these means-tested legacy benefits that have been around, one of which is housing benefit for people of working age. Pensioners are okay, they continue to claim, anybody 66 plus can claim housing benefit, but anybody under that age will have to claim universal credit to receive any housing cost element. And that will be a concern for many landlords out there who deal with people on benefits, because housing benefit, despite some of its flaws, it's a far better administered benefit than the housing cost element of universal credit, because landlords are recognised by law as what they call a person affected. They have rights to challenge decision and rights to an independent tribunal, which they don't have under universal credit. But in the process of moving over from these legacy benefits, they reckon about half of them who move over will benefit from it. So they might be getting more money, not so much to do with housing costs, but maybe to do with a personal element of their work. Some of them will end up no better off. But out of the 2.5 million, they reckon just under 1 million will end up worse off. And there will be a scheme called transitional protection. And the idea is that that scheme will cushion the loss by giving them an award. So if they move over and let's say they're worse off under universal credit by, say, £100, then that £100 will be paid to them by this thing called transitional protection. But as the name suggests, it's not a long-term thing. It will at some point disappear, either through benefits every year going up to the point where that £100 is then eroded and then raised, or they can actually lose it just by having a change in circumstances, and they could lose it within weeks of actually receiving it. So what I'm going to be doing, certainly on my own, I'll be doing training in different parts of the UK, and I'll be doing consultations like Zoom calls and things like that with landlords that are interested. I think the NRLA is thinking about setting up the kind of face-to-face training that I used to do in the regional hubs in the UK. I'm waiting to hear back from them. Up until recently, there hasn't really been an appetite for that, but I think now, slowly but surely, people are returning to their workplaces, and that's now starting to happen. So if that does happen, that will be announced. But what I'll do through Property Tribes, if we're doing any of these training in London, Birmingham, or whatever, I'll put something on there so that if people are interested, they can come along to that.
Well, we're so fortunate to have you with this such in-depth knowledge of how UC and LHA works, Bill, because you're such a support to the landlord community, helping both landlords and indeed tenants when they experience difficulties with this. But I was just wondering, you know, when you fought a battle for a landlord, do you very often hear them say, never again? Do you think that landlords are going to be less inclined to take tenants in receipt of UC when, you know, it goes to the migration across and so many more tenants and that their housing element is being run through UC? I can see even more mayhem behind those high walls at the DWP, and also even more landlords and indeed tenants affected just at a time when the government need private sector landlords to house you know, this demographic.
Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt over the last number of years. I mean, I remember doing the open letter to Neil Cowling in 2017.
Yeah, I'll pop a link to that underneath this video, because we had that open letter on Property Tribes, and we were quite surprised that he did respond via Twitter. So yeah, it seems that he's put up a few more barriers to people getting through to him now, from what you said earlier.
Yeah, but what he did was he really dismissed what I was saying. He was suggesting that because of the nature of the work I do, it's obvious that people come to me with problems, but in the scheme of things, the problems were very, very few and far between. And I was saying, well, that's not the case, Neil. A lot of the things that you're doing, you're actually allowing people to keep money, and they're getting, sometimes in London, the higher rented areas, over £1,000 every month, and they're misspending that, and you're allowing them to do that, and you've got an obligation to support the Secretary of State to prevent that type of thing from happening. It's public funds misuse. There's no other way of describing it. And the APA scheme, the alternative payment scheme or direct payment scheme, was set up to avoid that. And the courts have an expectation that that scheme, if a landlord is wanting to take a case to court, they'll expect the landlord first and foremost to exhaust all the other avenues, including direct payments. And I see landlords all the time who are losing £10,000, £15,000 through this. Now, the thing about it is, it's very patchy. There are some areas of the country where there's not the same difficulties. In Scotland, where I operate, where I live, I don't get the same number of referrals, which suggests that the scheme in Scotland's actually been handled a bit better. Same equally applies, I would say, to the northeast of England and the northwest of England, where I really get very few landlords phoning me from Newcastle or Sunderland or you know, Barron, Furness and that, saying they've got a problem with direct payments here. In fact, some landlords actually prefer it. But the further south you go, that's when you then start to see the problems. And the communication or lack of communication for landlords in particular, because they don't give a landlord a dedicated phone number, nor do they give them a dedicated email address, which would actually benefit the whole thing. They actually make it much better for DWP themselves, but they see it as additional work. And one of the aims of universal credit was to reduce work, staff numbers, and they haven't been able to do that because of the chaos that's been caused by COVID. But the plan long term would be to reduce those staff numbers, and those agency staff will first of all probably disappear. But my worry is that when you take on these extra 2 million staff, they're already struggling just now. What will it be like with another 2 million staff? And the other thing I'm finding as well is they've set up what they call a risk review team because of that £6 billion overpayments. They were getting rightly criticised by ministers, by the National Audit Office and others. So they set up this risk review team, and what they are doing is causing chaos. They're going the opposite. They instead of not asking for validation, now they are asking for validation in various forms. And one of my bulletins last week was about a refugee in London who had got a property from one of my landlord clients, was receiving benefit. And then out of the blue, in August last year, this risk review team became involved, suspended his claim, asked him for various forms of identification. And in the bulletin, I explained the extent of it. It was just ridiculous what he was being asked to do, standing outside his house, taking photographs of him standing at the number of his house with a newspaper to show it was done on a particular date, things like that. Crazy stuff. Now, what they could have done was they could have written to the landlord saying, can you confirm Mr. Irvine is now resident there and he's occupying the property, and can you confirm the rent charge and things like that? And if a landlord in those circumstances gives wrong information and an overpayment occurs, the landlord can be then held responsible for that overpayment. But it's in the landlord's interest, the DWP's interest, for the two of them to work together to improve the validation of these things. But DWP at the moment are resisting the private landlords, not the social landlords. They've actually given them a portal and they now share information with them, much more than they do with the private landlord.
Well, Bill, you couldn't make it up. It's bordering on farcical, really. And now we're moving into an inflationary environment with the energy crisis, cost of living crisis, and I can't see universal credit or LHA keeping in line with inflation. And, this is important to consider because landlords have often looked on universal credit or LHA housing payment as kind of like guaranteed rent from the government. So in thinking of it like that, it does give you some feeling of security. But with all these issues with the DWP that you're coming across on a daily basis and now entering into this inflationary environment, it's not looking a very attractive proposition to me at all.
Yeah, but I think it's going to affect not just people on benefits. I think people who are working, who see all the things that are happening, they're now saying that the fuel costs could per household go up to as much as £5,000. Now that's just unbelievable. And I heard, Liz Truss was apparently saying this morning about yesterday's meeting with the suppliers, where I think it was been agreed that they're not going to do anything in terms of hitting them with a tax on their profits. And some of these profits have been ridiculous. Apparently, she said it's not a bad thing to have profits, and nobody would argue against that. But when people have been exploited, and that's how I see it. I think a lot of people see it at the moment. And the same is happening at the fuel petrol station and things like that. They were caught out. Some of the suppliers were actually charging, continued to supply these fuels at a much higher rate than they should have been charging for. And I think the same is going to apply here. But one of the things I've noticed is that more and more people are saying to me that they're now starting to take measures to try and keep down their bills. The HMO landlords, on the other hand, they've for many years accepted, that we'll pay the costs of the fuel, per room, rather than getting them billed individually. So they're now getting hit with tremendous uplifts, 2 and 3 times what they were paying before. And at the moment, it doesn't seem any way out for them, other than to try and change the terms of tenancy agreements and trying to get the individual to then take responsibility. But that's unlikely to happen in this environment, because there's no tenant's going to say, yeah, I'm happy to take on an agreement where I absorb the cost of these things. But at the moment, the landlord's doing that for me. I don't think that's going to happen. So there's certainly going to be loads of problems. But I think even people who are working will struggle with this. Martin Lewis, the money advice chap, he suggests that there's going to be a bit like the poll tax, big reaction to this non-payment campaign, things like that. And he may be right, but I remember many years ago when I worked in social work, it was often the case that if somebody missed 1 or 2 payments, their electricity or gas were just simply cut off. And unless they bring in measures to prevent that from happening, just like they did last year, the year before with COVID, where they said, you can't evict people during this period of time. And they may have to bring in measures like that to prevent people from being cut off. But at some point, I think down the line, they'll have to pay that much increased charge. I certainly wouldn't be telling people not to pay.
Well, the Energy Saving Trust have got some good resources. They've got a guide for landlords on reducing energy, which is great for those landlords that have bills included. And they also have a guide that you can give your tenants to help them with their energy consumption. So, it'd be well worth landlords educating their tenants, whether they are bills included or not, because if you have a tenant that's paying their own bills and you help them manage their energy efficiently, then they're more likely to be able to pay the rent. So I think landlords can actually be quite kind of proactive in this area. But Bill, let's just wind this up with what would be your top 3 tips for a landlord thinking of taking on a UC, a tenant in receipt of UC housing element. What would be your top 3 tips for as easy a possible landlord life under the circumstances of the DWP that we've been talking about on this call?
It's a difficult one. I mean, what I say to most of my landlords that are considering taking on people on benefits is the more you know about the benefit system, and the more you know about direct payments, how to access them, and when they're refused, how you can then pursue that. The more you know about that, then the more likely you'll not lose out. But what I find is that many landlords are not willing to make that effort, partly because they're already working, maybe full time, and they've only got 1 or 2 properties, so the property side of things is only a kind of sideline. So they're not willing to put in that effort. If they're not willing to do that, I would suggest that what they try and do, as some landlords are now doing, is actually employing maybe housing benefit staff or DWP staff to help them do the housing management type of thing, but also help them with ensuring that the claims are actually made at the right time by their tenants and that the direct payments are actually followed through. Because a lot of times with the landlords, they make requests for direct payments and then they sit back and wait and they don't get anything, so they make a further request. That's not the right way to do it. What they should do is follow up that original request and do their best to try and pin DWP down as much as they possibly can. The other thing I would say to them is that as far as the landlords are concerned, what you should try and do is encourage your tenant from day one to sign a mandate authorising them access to the information that relates to the housing cost element, nothing more. If you get that mandate, in some areas it's much easier for them to share information with you, and it's a lack of information sometimes causes a lot of landlords to frustration. But if you've got that mandate authorising you to speak for them, or you get what they call explicit consent by the tenant going into their journal and giving explicit consent to Bill Irvine to speak on their behalf about their housing cost element. If you get that, then DWP should be able to exchange information with you, but only in relation to the housing costs, which is the part that you're interested in. So getting educated, getting the cooperation of your tenant, getting the mandate of authority, I would say these are the kind of main things. The other thing I would say at the moment with these overpayments is there are more and more of these coming out and landlords are receiving them. And what I would suggest you do is challenge every single one of them, because all the ones that I'm challenging are being successful. And what I do is I tackle it from day one and they back off usually, because I usually hit them between the eyes with a lot of information. Much of what some of the staff that deal with it were knowing about, and I think it kind of frightens them off. But don't sit back and expect them to go away, because they will come after you for that overpayment. And they can actually take it off any payments that you're receiving on behalf of other tenants. It's what they call the blameless tenant method. So don't sit back and think the whole thing's going to go away.
Well, that's absolutely brilliant, Bill. As I said, we're so lucky to have you with your in-depth knowledge of this topic. And I do encourage anybody or any landlord that's struggling with an issue to do with universal credit to get in touch with Bill. That's what he's there for. He's doing little bits and pieces of training as well, so you might want to look into that. So Bill, thank you ever so much for joining me on this call. And I would recommend everybody, and I'll put the link below this video as well, of your recent thread on property tribes, where you were in this loop where you actually just went right back to the beginning and were told that you couldn't get the information you needed to sort out this particular issue that your landlord was experiencing. So Just don't go changing, Bill. It sounds like we need you more than ever.